Welcome to another Lumion live stream tutorial. This is Chris Welton from CweltonDesign. In this tutorial, we're going to cover Skylight 2 in Lumion 9. So, having just done a Real Skies tutorial explaining a lot of the differences in the sky render engine from Lumion's default and as well the new Real Skies, I kind of explained in there why they changed Skylight to Skylight 2. I figured this to be a good opportunity to kind of re-explain Skylight, as I've grown to understand it much better than I did about a year ago when it first came out with Lumion 8. So I figured it was worth its own tutorial to be able to explain how it kind of works again and how it is integrated with the new Real Skies. Why did they make a big deal of calling it Skylight 2? And to talk about the new Ultra setting they have set up, maybe do some comparisons and render times, and just kind of get a good overview of this awesome new effect. So, let's go ahead and jump into Lumion here. Okay, so first off, kind of jumping off of the Real Skies we were discussing. Lumion has a default sky engine where we can change the clouds, we can make the move, all of those things. See, this is what Lumion has had since Lumion 1. When they introduced Skylight for Lumion 8, they integrated it into this sky engine that Lumion has by default. And now that we have the new Real Skies effect in Lumion 9, it's rendering skies a little bit differently. And so they've had to go in and figure out how to recalculate Skylight with this new type of image-based lighting. And it's come back with some pretty impressive results. And definitely with Skylight 2 combined with the new Real Skies, creates colors and realism that Lumion 8 just couldn't quite achieve. I mean, the Lumion sky by default is still really, really good. But they've incorporated this different type of different method of lighting, which just required them to go in and adapt Skylight to it. And now it works seamlessly with both engines. You don't have to worry about switching anything. Lumion does that all by default when you set up the new Skylight 2. So it's got a fancy Skylight 2, even though it's the same image. And if we take a look at it, it is pretty much exactly the same, except for now there's a fast, high, and an ultra. So again, to try to explain, I still don't have a full understanding exactly how Skylight works. Something about this, the sun is rendered at multiple positions to be able to create better ambient light and better realistic shadows. I know, for example, when Lumion's default shadows turned on right here are basically just a gray shape on the ground. There's no gradient, there's no value to it, where it's closer to here and lighter over here. And Skylight goes ahead and fills kind of that gap, and it adds kind of a blue. It's known for adding a bluish tint to everything, kind of the natural blue skylight that comes in from the sun. And we can adjust several of these values by upping the brightness here and upping the saturation. So it takes a bit to render this. So I'm just going to go ahead and show a couple slides here of pre-rendered shots at different positions to kind of re-equate us with what these values do. This is not new. It's just the same from Lumion 8. And now we can look at these two toggles, and these really just have to do with the light being calculated in either the default projected or the default reflections that we always see in the glass, where we look at We look and we see clouds and reflective surfaces, or planar reflections when we happen to have reflection planes on there. They're just knobs to check. I don't think they really affect render time much at all, just precision. And it affects it a little bit. But one thing that affects render times the most, of course, is these render quality settings here. Now, I don't know exactly what exactly they're doing quality-wise. I just know that on the render, the normal render speed here, it says fast render speed. Skylight is still very slow when you add it. It is incredible what it does, but it is also very taxing. It's almost like adding reflection planes. So if you're doing an animation, it dramatically affects it. It's worth it if you can fit it in there. If you're on a time crunch, this is going to be one of those effects you're going to have to scale down to meet a deadline, and for sure this and reflection planes, that's just kind of life. When we have the time, this is, especially for still images, crank it all the way up. When we have the time, we can use it, maybe even on just specific scenes that could really take advantage of it, but it really makes Lumion shine. And again, high was set before, and high does a couple more calculations of the sun and gets a little softer effects. I've definitely noticed it in some of my renders when I first started playing with Lumion 8. You can see the crispness go up. Seems like normal just gets the nice shadows kind of in there, and high would start to get some details to pop a little bit better. The shadows seem to really play off of edges and details notably better. And now we have an ultra effect. And I kind of made the joke that if you just want to sit and let your computer render forever, if you do this on an animation, you go ahead and hit that button. It's kind of like adding, it's probably comparable to adding 10 reflection planes almost. I would not recommend using ultra for an animation, but for stills, it's all game. You can still crank out with all these other effects going on in reflection planes. You can get stills to get kind of slow, but when you have time and your scene isn't too heavy, I definitely would crank it up to high or ultra on your still renderings. That's where it makes the most sense. I'd be even skeptical of using high in animations, but sometimes we're just going to get excellent images just from stills. So one of the best ways I figured I could explain how Skylight does work is actually watching it render and kind of seeing what it does. I preset up a couple scenes here. One way to I found helps show off the Skylight effect, the lighting and what it's actually doing, is I've went ahead, I have a real sky set and I have Skylight set. This one's set to normal. And I have the styrofoam effect here, and I've just turned everything down to get kind of more realistic shadows of what our normal lighting would be. You could also render out, of course, this lighting map, which does basically the same thing, except for it takes out the sky. So I just happen to prefer using the styrofoam effect to check this out. And so I have these effects all equal across these three shots here, except for each one the Skylight goes to high and it goes to ultra. And then I have these scenes here, which are kind of a better setup scene with the right lighting and other effects that kind of look like a final render. Again, set up with Skylight normal, high, ultra. And I'm just going to go and hit render here. And you'll start to see it. So here's the first pass. You're starting to see the blue come in, and it came in really quickly. It's pretty splotchy. And as it's going through this ultra one, we're seeing like 3 bands here. It's going a little quicker than I expected. I probably should have done higher resolution. And then we're doing the ultra quality. And you just notice there's more samples being taken. And we'll take a look at these after they've rendered and see if we can compare anything else too. But you're definitely seeing there that it's taking more passes. It's Still 16 passes on here, but you're seeing that it's sampling more as we go. We're seeing some more blue in here. Again, we're getting these kind of these splotches. It's lighting kind of get mixed around. And on Ultra, we're kind of seeing light in other places that wasn't being shown before. This didn't show it as well as I expected. Maybe I'll try another scene, but already you probably saw the difference in time. Let me try this scene. Again, set up the same way. Okay, there we go. This is kind of a good scene. Look at that light ray coming in here. We see those different samples. Look at those multiple samples showing up on here. Those bands of light. That's Skylight in action. This one worked out a lot better. In Ultra, we're seeing more samples, and of course, it blends it together in the end to kind of create that beautiful soft light. It's popping out really well in the trees here. It's incredible. So now with the realistic effects on, take note of the shadow going here. And I can notice it in the trees a little bit better too. Just the little details of what pop out. And here comes Ultra. So I'm seeing this blurriness all going around the sample and clean up. And settle into more natural gradient of light as it comes down from the ceiling. I wish I understood exactly what's going on, but you can see, and you see how much Lumion has to work to get that extra bit, to do those extra samples. I think it's just literally the number of samples it's doing. So let's go ahead and take a look at those after they've been rendered. So we're starting here. So this was the rendered output from this scene. This is at low, high, and ultra. It's really not popping too much in this scene, but if you take a look at this countertop here on the edge, you're starting to see there's just more light kind of popping up in other areas that the direct sun isn't hitting. And then in the realistic scene, you can see the countertop there. The countertop gets a little blue and high, and in ultra, it's got full light there. So, and the one we just rendered here, so I can visibly see like 3 bands here. So that's low quality. That's not what we'd really want to see. It helps. And look at the detail in the trees there, and that little bluish of this natural sunlight. And now you can see even more bands. I mean, it's good. Looking at it this way in the styrofoam, I think makes it look worse than it really is. And we're just seeing even more details popping in there. And then we go to ultra. Well, we're seeing even more different bands in here. But the detail is softening up in a lot of these other areas. Let's take a look at what with the realistic render, how this is set up. So I'm barely seeing banding at all in here. I can kind of notice it there in the trees. Wow, and there it is. It looks a lot better, of course. We're just looking at the raw effect of Skylight in that styrofoam. But when we see it add into everything else, it's really coming through. We're seeing this gradient here on the wall that's really starting to pop, and you're noticing on the covers there. It's actually pretty good to take a look at this, and it's about lights bouncing up above here that wasn't there before. Then we go to ultra. Man, that's an excellent gradient. You know, it's that like 80% more render time to get that 20% better look. So that's all on you. It's all about decisions every day in Lumion. It's in rendering world. We're making decisions and trying to see if we can budget the time to do it. But Lumion, it's nice that they've added this extra option to get that extra detail. So you're barely. What I should do is I should do a render without any hyperlight really quick. I think that would be a good idea. Sorry, without any skylight. I keep slipping between the two of them sometimes. Let's see if we can compare. See, we just get a bar. I mean, it's good, and the soft shadows that came in help that. If we didn't have soft shadows on, this would just be a bar. It'd be a black, white. So let's see if I can compare that. Yeah, perfect. Let me... Okay. So that's no skylight at all. It's a skylight. And then we just jump from no skylight to Skylight Ultra. And look at the chair. All right, well, that's about the best I can really show you guys. I thought it was worth jumping into and just kind of diving into what the effects were. I tried to talk about Skylight last year, but I really honestly didn't quite understand it that much. I understand it more now. It's still kind of an enigma. It's a pretty button that makes things prettier in my render, but also makes my computer hotter, render longer. Everything's a trade-off, just like reflection planes. Love them, but they're terrible in render times. I think that, looking back, Skylight was probably one of the biggest things to make. The shadows helped. Soft shadows and the fine detail shadows were a big jump. But other than that, the lighting change from Lumion 7 to 8 with Skylight has been the biggest game changer. Its effect is so evident if you look at Lumion renders in 7 and Lumion renders in 8. Some people were, I guess, mimicking this or mocking this up in before 8 manually to create. I'm not sure I understand that. And then Lumion's done it automatically with Skylight. But just understanding this effect is pretty crucial. It takes a lot of render time. It's kind of tricky to understand. The more you understand it, the better off you'll understand when's worth using it and when it's probably not worth the extra render time. But yeah, they've improved it greatly with the combination of real skies. I've actually even been able to, if we can do a shot with the evening, I've been getting this orange. Usually the Skylight always makes things blue, but I've been getting some orange too in some of the evening scenes. It's been really pretty. I don't know if I could do that before, but I definitely can achieve that with the real skies. And then a quick note before I take off in this, I also want to mention one of the biggest downfalls to Skylight, besides its render time, is that it is not previewable. You are not. I mean, they try to do it in this brightness. They're kind of faking it. The brightness isn't a big deal. It's the saturation. If you're new to using Skylight, watch out with saturation. Again, remember the clips I sent before showing comparison of saturation. Set to 1 is pretty good. Maybe it might go up to here, but once you start going higher to 1.2, everything is just going to become really blue. But you wouldn't know it. See, it's super blue. You wouldn't know it in the preview. I've talked to them, and from what I understand, it's a technical limitation. Maybe one day we'll get something that can preview it better, but because Skylight's so intense, it is not something that can be previewed in real time. So it's always worth doing a test render before you start an animation. I mean, I'm going to show you that right now. Probably going to do a video on this in the future. See, I have an animation here. It's always worth going to so obviously entire clip is where most people render. They hit this and then they have to sit back and then wait for the render to go. And then hours later you'll see, oh wow, everything's super blue. current shot is an okay one, but Hyperlight actually works very different in still renderings versus animations. This is essentially a still render, but if you want to get one shot, you just go ahead and either do the first shot, or sometimes it's really good to do keyframes, because it'll do a keyframe is every time you click on these guys. Those are 4 keyframes, and so if I render the keyframes, here, let's make this interesting. I'll have at least one move. So we'd have at least a kind of animation path. I know it's kind of a tangent, but it's very applicable to managing render times with Skylight. So we do the keyframes, we'll do our resolution and our quality. And it's going to render each one of these keyframes really quickly and give us an idea what our lighting looks like. I very much recommend that with Skylight, because it's not previewable. It's not the biggest. It's actually not that big of a deal. I was disappointed at first with it, but you get used to it. Just don't put that saturation slider too high up. Sometimes people can offset it with the color correction. You orange it, and then you add Skylight. And it kind of does a cool balance. I'm just going to do frame range. I'm just going to start on frame 0. So it's got orange in the blue here, and orange in the light. There's all sorts of ways of managing it. But that's all for Skylight 2, and I talked a lot more about it than I would expect. I hope that you guys have a better understanding of Skylight, and kind of understanding why there's a Skylight 2 and what Skylight is and how to manage it better. It's still kind of a tricky thing to understand. It's not very straightforward, but it does great things, and I highly recommend using it on your still renderings if you're not used to it, and maybe even on your animations if you got the horsepower to run it. Alright, and that about covers it. Thanks for watching, guys. Please leave any comments. For questions in the comments, subscribe to the channel. I got many more things to cover. And thanks for watching. Until next time, guys.